This episode of Friends Talking Nerdy is brought to you by this show's very first patron, Ruth Firetag. She heard about this show from her lovely daughter Meredith, who happens to be our guest star on this episode here, where we continue our discussion on Star Trek. She went to Patreon and became our very first patron, donating money monthly to us to make this show better. So thank you very much, Ruth, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Captain's log, stardate 6051. Had trouble sleeping last night. My hiatal hernia is acting up. The ship is drafty and damp. I complain, but nobody listens.
Star Trek 12. So very tired. See the original cast in their latest, greatest adventure.
Captain, Klingons off the starboard bow.
Again with the Klingons. Mr. Scott, give me full power.
It's not good, Captain. I cannot reach the control panel.
Movies! What a ripoff! I don't have to sit here and take this.
If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
So we go from one of the best Star Trek movies to a rather mediocre one. Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Now, at the end, the whole purpose of going into Star Trek II, Nimoy thought, they're not going to make another one, so might as well go out in style. But he had so much fun filming that movie that with the success that Star Trek II became, they brought him back. And they obviously at the end of Star Trek II, they did plant seeds with the whole mind meld and remember deal with him and McCoy. But Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. What thoughts? Yeah. What do we think about that?
That was another one where I feel like most of the movie was,
There we go. We go from high and we go right on down to low.
Yeah, I mean, like it just was again like another like. It felt like an excuse. Most of the movie did just to kind of make another movie, and the, you know, like the end was the only sort of worthwhile part for me. But I just again feel like, and maybe this is uncharitable, but I just feel like Shatner was like, I want another reason to Shatner around as Kirk. And I was not horribly impressed with that one. Again, it's just not terribly memorable to me. That, you know, they have this whole journey, and it's the end that's the only part that sticks. And I have to find him.
Yeah. You're Meredith, I'll concur with you on that one. It's like that. I mean, no, Nimoy did direct this one, but two was so successmal. You know, it was such a big moneymaker for that time. You know, Paramount's like, hey, G. Roddenberry's like, you kidding? You know, we got make this money. But you're right. It's not as I wouldn't say. I mean, it's kind of like, which is the worst Star Trek movie, but it's not as unwatchable. But it's just like, oh God. You know, I mean, one of the best parts is, seeing, Christopher Lloyd play a Klingon. That's kind of cool.
Oh, yeah.
That's interesting.
For me, like I said, I think the movie for me is just mediocre. I mean, if it's on TV, I got no problem watching it. It does have some rewatchability compared to Star Trek The Motion Picture. For me, though, my big complaint is just the scope. It felt like a smaller movie. You know, when the Genesis planet was exploding, It really felt like they were just on a set. And, whereas in the previous movie, when they had, Kirk, McCoy, Marcus, and the others in the Genesis cave, even though it was a matte painting, it still felt big. It felt huge. And, The Search for Spock did not feel like a grand epic that it could have been. Yeah. I mean, we did. I think, we did see the destruction of the original Enterprise, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe that was it was a change, but it's just I think it just progressed. It just moved it along. I think it was about the fact that we're really hot. These film, we're kind of making money. Let's just keep that keep that going.
Yeah, keep that wagon train going. Yeah.
Don't blame. Like I said, because like I said before, we know what's coming. It's going to be worth it. So it's going to be worth the wait.
Yeah.
That ride. That's one thing about Star Trek that was always like a roller coaster. Oh boy, it's going to be bad, but when we come back from this, it's going to be so nice. It's going to be bad. Come again, it's going to be so nice. It's just that pattern just keeps coming back.
Yeah, up and down, up and down.
Yep.
And with that, we got another up. Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. What was originally intended to be a vehicle where Eddie Murphy was the co-star. Yeah, Eddie Murphy was... Yeah, Eddie Murphy said he was a fan, so they created the movie, and his character ended up becoming the Catherine Hicks character. The mother from
my God.
Yeah, the mother from Seventh Heaven became the role that Eddie Murphy was supposed to play, the scientist that helped with the whales, George and Gracie. And yeah, I mean, thankfully Eddie Murphy had the right mindset at the end. I mean, he realized that if he had been involved, it would have been like Superman 3. It would have been, Eddie Murphy in a Star Trek film. Superman 3 was Richard Pryor in a Superman film, and it didn't.
Oh boy, that's we should do a podcast about that. Films that you go, what the fuck, man.
Well, Superman 3 was not Superman 4 bad. I mean, there's some good elements about 3, but The Voyage Home, though, one thing I liked is that it wasn't a third part of a story. I mean, the Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, and The Voyage Home are one long story. Secondly, I like the fact that it was a movie with a message, but they didn't pound you over the head about it. It was around the time in the 80s that, stuff like Earth Day first started hitting, awareness of environmental issues. And, talking about how, causing an animal to go extinct could cause problems in the future. Something people got to think about, but, people are only going to really consider that if you don't hit them over the head with that message.
Yeah, definitely. But it worked out great. The fact the seeing them in modern time, I think, was really kind of funny, really kind of like a fish out of water story. And this one was more subdued than in 3. Where 3 got a little hammy. This one they literally had, it seemed to move much smoother, much better. This is probably why I think this is like maybe after Khan, my second favorite old school Star Trek movie.
For me, though, I would say it's the closest that the movies got to capturing the feel of the original show.
Yeah. That's you're spot on. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that the characters kind of like came through really well in this one, and kind of the setup of the plot and being in modern times. Yeah, kind of let them revisit, but in a kind of new, fresh way, like who they were and how they interacted, and that dynamic that was so good in the original show. And I agree with you about the message. They did a really good job highlighting, like, hey guys, maybe this is something we should, I don't know, maybe think about, sort of, but it wasn't super preachy, but it clearly, illustrated and made it fun and engaging, and they did do a good job of, sweeping you along in the story, about whales, which kind of random, but also it was a cool, demonstration of these questions that were kind of starting to be brought up about, like, how do we take care of our current planet? Because, Star Trek is in the future and the planet's perfect. There's no money. Everything's fine. There, like, we can replicate whatever we need, and resources aren't as much of an issue, to kind of leave those current issues behind. But then in this movie, you get to kind of start that, like, readdressing of what contemporarily we should be keeping in mind for that ideal in the future, to hopefully get there. Someday we'll live in Star Trek. At this rate, we're probably going to be more in idiocracy times. But you know what? I need to have faith. Whenever I get down on humanity, I'm like, I'm going to watch some Star Trek. I think we can get there.
One day.
Meditation's the key. Meditation's the key.
Or lots of weed. Well, from there, Star Trek was becoming big, booming business, so Paramount decided, why don't we bring back another show? Gene Roddenberry. There's another great documentary on Netflix that William Shatner did, of all people, called Chaos on the Bridge, which kind of a behind-the-scenes exploration of how Star Trek: The Next Generation came to be, and it essentially, Paramount found a way to essentially trick Gene Roddenberry into doing the show again. But the good thing about this, and I think more studios should take note of what Gene Roddenberry did, is Gene Roddenberry essentially did a soft reboot. Unlike the Ghostbusters remake that tried to redo everything again, everybody knew Star Trek. Why try to recreate it? Make something different. And, he did that, with the characters alone. I mean, Picard, nothing like Kirk. Riker was nothing like Spock, and just some of the great characters they had. What are our thoughts on The Next Generation?
Love it. No, I mean, I think they did a fantastic job modernizing, some of the classic ideas and themes of expanding our knowledge and our horizons as many peoples at that point, and continuing that human urge for more. But yeah, I mean, time had progressed, and women actually wore the same uniforms instead of miniskirts. Where I still don't understand how they didn't flash the audience the entire time during the original series.
Maybe they were swimming trunks. I don't. But
yeah,
you got to remember though, season 1, Troy did have some rather unique outfits, to say the least.
Well, sure.
Form-fitting would be the right way to say that, Tim.
Yeah.
Form-fitting.
And there still were definitely moments in that show that I don't think were as kind of up to speed in the feminist aspect as perhaps some of the later ones, but then we're still not there in the world today. So, but they did, they did a better job, and they, I just think they, brought up new questions, or questions that had kind of been unanswered or were continuing to be asked, in newer ways. And so I think they did a really beautiful job of keeping some of the same beauty, but also moving it forward.
Expanding on it. Yeah, I think to your point, too, about how women were treated in the show, I've spoken about this on other issues in previous episodes, and how, certain characters are portrayed. And while, yes, women can sometimes be emotional, I don't think I'm, revealing some major surprise here. The characters of, the female characters, especially in the first season, came off as if a 60-year-old man who's never met a woman tried to imagine what a woman was like. It did not have a ring of truthfulness to the characters.
I think Crusher came off okay.
That was the one exception, but you had Tasha Yar.
I thought that was incredible. First step, head of security. That was kind of when she got killed. I was like, wow, they're not playing on this. No one is safe on that show.
But that's the thing, though. They could have done a lot more with her character. I mean, her complaint is my complaint with her character is that most of the time she was just standing on the bridge, hailing frequencies up, sir, and they didn't really do much. And then, Troy at the beginning of the series was just whiny and emotional. If you should be heard, Will, shut up. But then I think of the last episode of the series, All Good Things. I absolutely love that little bit near the beginning when Worf and her are coming out of the holodeck, and Worf pauses and he mentions something about, maybe we should talk to, Commander Riker. And then she has this great look on her face and says, why? Do we want to invite him along? This is at the time where Worf and Troy's romance was beginning to blossom. And it was great. Yeah. It was great to see that little barb and Worf added on the show. But what do you think, Noel?
I think, that this, for me, I think I'll let Meredith go wax poetic about Data, but for me, I think it was Smiley, played by Dwight Schultz's character on the holodeck, that really did that for me. And also Diane, played by Whoopi Goldberg as well. That really when they started becoming more on the series, I kind of like that fantasy, because for the holodeck scenario, if you think about an environment that anything is possible, that's the geeky aspect of it that I liked about it. But also, like I said, meeting other species. We find about, the Ferengi we find here. We find more about the Romulans here. The Klingons as well. We find more about the High Command. And, and Worf's ascension up. And the same with Geordi. Like, there's so many aspects of the show that I like that it just, for science fiction at the time, they ran with it. I mean, at that time, that was like, that show, I mean, for me in New York, that came on Saturdays at like 7 o'clock on like PIX. My dad and I watched the show religiously. It was incredible. Incredible.
And it also introduced the bad guys that I hate the most. I just don't like them. Every time they're on, I just skip to the next episode on Netflix. The Borg.
Oh, you didn't like the Borg.
You blame Q for that.
Well, I mean, the good thing about Q, though, is, Q's my favorite character, but that episode, Q was just trying to warn them. And, in his way, he was trying to help the Enterprise prepare for the oncoming of the Borg. But I never liked the Borg at all. The Best of Both Worlds, even though that's most fans' two favorite episodes, not a fan. I didn't care for it.
Wow, really?
So why don't you like the Borg?
The Borg had no personality. Sorry. I just... and to correlate with another sci-fi series, Doctor Who, with the Cybermen. Cybermen were mechanical beings as well, kind of a hive collective similar to the Borg, but the Cybermen were just better villains. I don't know. I just never really liked the Borg.
Well, you don't see it as a metaphor? No. Okay, that's kind of what I see in the Borg, is like the dangerous side of our integration with technology, like. Star Trek, technology is everything. Like, you think when the ship's computers go down, or I think there's an episode where the ship's computer goes a little crazy, and all hell breaks loose, and they can't survive without the technology. However, they've done it in such a way where the advances are constructive and healthy, and help humanity be more humanity and the best of humanity. Rather than diminishing it. And I think the Borg were kind of the contrast to that, of what could happen if we overly integrate with technology. We lose ourselves, we lose our personality, our individuality, and we just become this, kind of consumed force. And so they terrified me as a child. Oh my God, I mean, they still creep me out today, but I think they were... No, they didn't have personality, but I think that's kind of the point.
Yeah, and for Star Trek, you had a alien force that no one could stop. And what Q did was just send them to different quadrants, said, let me show you something. It was like, they're coming. And when they started coming, I was like, that really changed the show, because that's really what think about it. You have the Federation itself is a correlation of different species, right? So the Romulans not part of it. You have other different species that are living in their own, don't give two drops about that. Then comes this alien race, or I like how how they got started. They're just we're taking over. You can't stop us. We're coming on like gangbusters. Change the name of the show. It actually, and the fact for Picard, when he turned, hopefully not spoiler there, but it just showed that their determination for that. It was on, man. I have to disagree. I think. What the Borg did for that show just moved in a whole different direction. It was a unique force that they could not stop.
I can agree with that. Still not a fan of them, but that experience, Locutus of Borg brought about the very next episode after the Best of Both Worlds. That's the one where Picard goes back home, and I think that's not the one where he picked up the flute, but it was just a personal story of him going home and, reconciling with his brother.
That was a great episode.
But, yeah, so many great episodes. To your point earlier about technology going nuts, I remember the episode where Data and Geordi go to the holodeck and try to have fun with a Sherlock Holmes story. Mm-hmm. And then, Data just solved everything right away. Geordi got bored and tried to leave, but then Geordi asked the computer to create a villain that could beat Data. And then that took over the entire Enterprise.
Right. So self-aware entity.
Yep.
But also was the one aspect about the Star Trek Next Generation I like is when Dr. Crusher left, that new doctor. Oh my! I thought it was tripping, but I can't remember the actress's name.
Dinah Muldaur. Dinah Muldaur.
I know nothing against her as an actress. I just think, but for her character as a new medical officer, when she was on, the show just had a totally different feel. And when she was on screen, it was just like, what is she doing? I feel bad to say this. Not taking away ability as an actress, but just for some reason, her character in that role, it became unwatchable. I don't know. I really can't answer why. It was this weird thing.
Well, it's chemistry. It was said in the Chaos on the Bridge documentary too that she just did not gel with the cast. And that showed on the screen. Dinah Muldaur.
You think?
Yeah. Dinah Muldaur did have a history in the original Star Trek. She did appear in a couple of episodes, and she was also in L.A. Law for a while. There was a famous episode of L.A. Law where they killed off her character she was waiting for an elevator, the doors opened up, she stepped in, but the elevator car wasn't there, and she fell to her death. Yeah. So,
She was tough to kind of watch at times, but she had some really great moments, and I think she was. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but she was another one where. So I didn't like Janeway initially.
Don't tell Sterling.
I won't tell Sterling, but it's funny watching both Janeway and her as a doctor as a younger girl, and then watching them both as an adult woman, and I have a much greater appreciation for both of them and the way that they handled situations being an adult female, because the kind of like tough harshness that I felt like they both had that I saw as unnecessary as a child, and I now see being an adult, as a woman, sometimes you have to be that way. And I think one of the things that I liked about Star Trek was that women didn't have to necessarily interact in that kind of fashion in order to be powerful, but having experience just trying to being in a position of power as a woman, I aligned more with the strategies that they took, and I think it was a good contrast in some ways to Crusher, because I think the times when Crusher had to stand up to Picard as well, they had this whole history and personal relationship. And I think Picard had a little, obviously he had a soft spot for her, and so it was much more, when she put her foot down, he was like, okay. And then the times when Picard and, oh my God, what was her name? Pulaski, kind of had face-offs. He didn't have that soft spot for her. In fact, they didn't really love each other that much as co-workers on the show, but they grew to respect each other. And so I feel like I understand where you're coming from, where she was not as fun to watch, but I think that there is something to her character that I appreciate now.
Well, the goal of that character, you got to keep in mind, they wanted Maurice Hurley took over head writing on that show, and they intentionally got rid of Gates McFadden, which was not the right move, but they wanted essentially a female McCoy. And that's, they did get that. It's just they had little things where they, there was an episode where she beamed down to a planet that was in the middle of a sickness, and She couldn't come back to the Enterprise until she, cured the disease, but she got the disease herself. And they did
the aging one.
Yeah, the aging one, and they kind of they hinted at why she transferred to the Enterprise. That she had deep respect for Picard, and that was great that they mentioned that and all, but they didn't go the extra steps on to your point, showing those two characters kind of melding together. They just never got comfortable. And, thankfully, Dr. Crusher came back to the show and, took over from there. Now, what about some favorite episodes?
Oh, man. I mean, the one that you mentioned, where they're in the holodeck and Geordi, asks the computer to create Moriarty, and Moriarty coming to life. And God, he has some great lines, about achieving consciousness and that like self-awareness that he suddenly received and the shift. And that was a great episode, especially in, contrasting with Data and his questions about what it means to be human. God, there's so many good ones. It's so hard.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. What are some of your favorites?
For me, one of my favorites. There's an episode in season 6. It's a 2-parter called Chain of Command, where Picard is captured and he's tortured. David Warner, an amazing character actor. If you don't recall his face right now, I can guarantee you've still seen his work. The whole method of the torture was he had 4 lights that he would shine at Picard and says, how many lights are there? Picard would say 4, and he would go, no, there are 5, and then he would shock him, and just kept on going, and just as at the point where Picard was just about to break, that's when he gets rescued. But the interaction between those two were amazing, and for me, I always have a soft spot for Q. Anytime Q showed up, you were going to have a good time.
Mm-hmm. Q is great.
Yeah. When Q actually made Data human for a second and turned him back. But also when Q gave he gave Data, he made Data laugh. He gave him a true laugh. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah.
What about you? What are some of your favorites?
The one episode that I liked was the name escapes me. I'll describe it. Basically, the members of the Enterprise who are disappearing coming back, and for some odd reason, a couple of the members of the crew remember being in an environment like they're on a table, like their bodies been replaced, like they've been going through these series of surgical experiments, but it happens in a flash. So I think they're going crazy. It was a fascinating episode. The name escapes me right now, but that one I really remember. That was kind of cool. The one where Picard goes home to visit his brother, and he starts to become human again. Him and his brother really have that long overdue talk, so we learn more about Jean-Luc. And, that one. Or the time where Q gave him the option of, what if he didn't... I think when Picard was younger, he got into a knife fight. Mm-hmm. And he got stabbed in the heart, and that's how he came to us. So Q gave him the option of, you can go back and change that environment. And he did, and it changed his whole life. So, like you always said, when Q was that little, the little mystery factor in there. But when Q lost his powers... I was like, they needed to do that. They needed to make him. They needed us to really. We loved him being evil, but we really saw the humanity in him, or lack thereof, or trying to get it. But like I said, it was that. That's probably like one of the all-time favorite characters on that show that had the ability to really change it in terms of how it's being written, but done in a way that really starts asking questions and pushing to the limit about the crew.
Now, in the Chaos on a Bridge documentary, one of the writers on the show had this. Great revelation during the interview, and he talked about, Gene Roddenberry was a noted atheist. His version of Star Trek was essentially humans finally, essentially Star Trek was Gene Roddenberry's version of heaven, and Q was God.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
But
yeah.
No, that makes sense.
Slightly insane. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a God that creates this world, come on. But all right, so some of my other favorites too are like a lot of the shows in the holodeck, like the Dixon Hill episodes with Picard.
Yeah.
I loved those. You can't forget Unification. Spock. It was the one where they think that Spock is a traitor. Sarek dies. Picard and I think Data or somebody had surgery to make themselves look like Romulans. They go to Romulus, and that's when Spock appears on the show for the first time. Yeah. And that also corresponded at the same time where Gene Roddenberry passed away. But that was a very great episode, and that encounter at Farpoint when McCoy showed up were, two big, torch passing moments. I think it was in season 7 where Scotty had a guest shot where you found out that Scotty, he intentionally trapped himself inside of a transporter console because a ship he was on was about to crash or something like that. And then the Enterprise finds a way to bring him back, and, he adjusts to life in the 24th century. And then they have that little bit with him in the holodeck on a revamped on the holodeck has the Enterprise as we all know it from when the 60s show. That was great to see with Picard. I think he even took a seat in the captain's chair.
One of my other favorites is Tanagra. Do you guys remember that one? It's this episode where the Enterprise encounters this alien race that the Federation had tried to communicate with before, and they just couldn't talk to each other. They just could not communicate. And so Picard goes to try again, and the two captains are talking at each other through the display screen, and both of them are totally confused, just completely confused, which is not an expression you normally see on Picard's face, so that moment in itself is nice.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sorry to cut you off, Meredith. Was like when the captain would say kind of emotional words when they were talking?
He'd say Jalak and someone at Tanagra.
Darmok.
Yeah.
Played by Paul Winfield.
Mm-hmm. And then he has his crew beam the two captains down to this planet, and they can't get beamed off. And the two of them just forced in this survival situation to learn to communicate. And the captain of the other ship ends up dying, but just that whole process of the universal translator doesn't work, and you have to pick up on these other cues, and they finally manage to figure out kind of the linguistic. They use stories from their history to describe situations, and just kind of the beauty of that new language and that new way of thinking, and the way that everyone has to shift their perspective. That was a great episode. And Riker's hot-headedness also, and you're like, okay, you're not ready for the captain's chair, buddy. Step down.
All right, so we will move on the list. The next feature film that came out is probably the worst one they made. Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. We are introduced...
Directed by William Shatner.
Yeah. They introduced the character of Sybok, Spock's brother, who is completely filled with emotion, and then they're going to go off and meet God, but God turns out to be an alien creature in a rubber suit that throws, papier-mâché rocks at them at the end of the episode.
Bring it closer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to see the ship. Bring it closer.
Honestly, I don't know if there's really that much to say about that particular movie. I think that may have been one, too, to where they had a continuity error where they had... was it that one or a previous one where they had Uhura not understanding the Klingon language, and they actually brought out a Klingon dictionary for her to interpret? I know they did that in one movie. I think they did it in 5.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
All right.
Listen, some gotta be nice. So let's move on.
Yeah, we'll move on. All right, we'll go on to the last and probably the third greatest of the original series films, Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, written and directed by Nicholas Meyer, who helped write and directed The Wrath of Khan and wrote Star Trek IV, the Voyage Home as well. I mean, Nicholas Meyer is probably one of the unsung heroes of the Star Trek franchise. I mean, without him, we may not be, talking about this today. But that's the one to where the Klingons and the Federation have peace. But then some forces in the Federation frame Kirk for the murder of a Klingon officer. Kirk is put on a Klingon world that's a prison world where David Bowie's wife Iman is there smoking cigars. Mm-hmm. And
shapeshifter. Right?
Shapeshifter, yeah. And then the Enterprise ultimately saves the day. Everybody's rescued, and there's peace among the Federation. Thoughts on this movie?
I like how it starts off. Sulu is a captain, and the plan and the Klingon world that they're mining their ore for explodes and sets off everything in motion. Christopher Plummer as I think it's Kang, right? General Kang.
Yeah.
Okay, you do remember that. I believe David Warner is in this one as well. He plays the Klingon ambassador.
And I think Kurtwood Smith, the father from that '70s show, played an alien character on that movie too.
No. Kurtwood Smith was the president of the Federation in 4 or 5.
Oh, that's right.
He was president. Yeah, I think David. I don't know if it's Warner, but we got to look that up. We got computers. We really could. Yeah. So anywho, yeah. So that's how it starts off. And you're right. It really it's incredible because there's this really inner plan. To they want to start a war. One part the Federation is like, we have a chance to take out the Klingons permanently after all of what they've done to us. I mean, it is a really fascinating story.
Yep, with Kim Cattrall as a scheming Vulcan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can't forget that. Just overall, pretty darn good film and a good way to kind of wrap up the original series characters. I mean, they were getting to that age to where. You really could not picture them actively going on missions again. I mean, I would think even Starfleet would, say, somebody in their 70s shouldn't be, traveling the stars.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of a nice wrap up, and the Klingons are very adversarial in the original series, and then kind of seeing them like trying to, the ones who. Kirk didn't have any love for them initially, and then seeing him trying to like rebuild that relationship and get over his own prejudices a little bit, I think, and then all of a sudden being thrown in that prison. It was fun, and I think it was a good sort of progression from some of the issues that were brought up in terms of the interspecies interaction in the original, and kind of like growing beyond that and forging that relationship with the Klingon Empire, trying to I enjoyed that movie thoroughly.
And with that, another episode of Friends Talking Nerdies into Books. Thank you all for listening. This is Tim Jousma. Feel free to tune in next week as we conclude our conversation on all things Star Trek. We'll be touching on Deep Space Nine, Voyager, the Next Generation movies, as well as the J.J. Abrams reboot and the future from there. So we hope you all enjoy us. Next week. Once again, we would like to thank Ruth Firetag for her support via Patreon. She is our very first patron on the show. We love you to death. The moment I told Maura, Noel, and Sterling and Ray the news, everybody celebrated, and we definitely enjoy your patronage patronage here. And anybody else, if you want to join Ruth and be a patron of the show, go to Patreon, search for Friends Talking Nerdy, and support us from there. We'd also like to thank Latino LRM Online, Latino Review Media, for their continued support of the podcast. If you're listening to us via the YouTube link I put up on the articles there, we thank you all for listening. And to everybody, if you haven't done so already, subscribe. We are on iTunes. We're in the Google Play Music Store. We want your support. So thanks again for listening. One more thing, as always, we thank Christopher Lazarek for his wonderful theme song. Head to ChristopherLazarek.com for information on how to buy his EP, Here's to You, which is available on all digital platforms. Thank you all for listening.
I'm just going to give it all I've got, like Scotty engineering the Enterprise. Scotty, we need more speed.
I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. She can't take any more.
Damn. Chekhov, reroute auxiliary power to the helm.
Scotty, the bridge. Captain, this is a little embarrassing, but I've never noticed the little lever I've been pushing. It's only about 2/3 of the way up. I actually can give her more.
That's great, Scotty. Mr. Spock, give us readings on...
Captain, Scotty again. Yeah, you're not going to believe this. There is another lever here, too. The ship can literally go 3 times as fast. I'm sorry, but I feel like such a capital J jerk right now.
It's okay, Scotty. Lieutenant Uhura, open all channels for...
Captain, I've got to interrupt again. I've just been thinking about this giving her all she's got thing. I mean, I've been completely wrong for years now. I feel terrible. I mean, think of how many crises we've been in where the issue was how fast we could go. I mean, I'm sorry, Captain.
Scotty, it's okay.
No, it's not. Eric's dead. At the funeral, I literally said the words to his wife. I was giving her all she's got.
Scotty, it's fine. Sulu, lock phasers.
Captain, I just got to jump in here. We don't have enough dilithium crystals to run the phasers. I've lost all credibility, haven't I?